what's up? You probably thought I was gonna step through that portal, huh? Well, joke's on you. I don't know how to edit that well yet. Also, I just thought it would have been a funny bit, but you know. Anyways, hello, my name is Michael, and welcome to the Bones YouTube channel. This is my first time actually introducing the channel. That's pretty nifty. Now, if you're anything like me, you're probably a big fan of the game Portal, which is a game that arguably needs no introduction. I might need to introduce the game. I'll make it brief. Portal is a puzzle game released by Valve back in 2007 where you have to complete several test chambers using a handheld portal device. Throughout the game, more and more factors are added in to make each chamber different, eventually leading you to escape the test course and take out the thing that's been guiding you this whole time. In one of these chambers, we as the player are introduced to a weighted companion cube, which I mean is just like the weighted storage cubes that we've seen before, but this one's got little pink hearts on it. You see this? Get that out of here. I don't want to see it anymore, all right? We have this now. See this? Peak design, all right? And I'm not the only one that thinks this, all right? Plenty of other people have fallen in love with this design and in ways that I don't even think the developers have anticipated. How did this become so popular? This cube was in the game for a fraction of it, all right? One test chamber, and yet it has become one of the most recognizable aspects of Portal. Up there with the cake and, I don't know, that hoop that falls from the sky at the end of the game. So Portal was a hit, without a doubt. However, with its fame came a lot of people that tried to fill in the gaps of the story, because Portal left a lot of its story vague and strictly to what we saw. And of course, one of the most popular theories to stem from this came from this video, made by the game theorist, in which he suspects that the companion cubes are secretly housing the bodies of test subjects. This sounds really dark, actually. Now, don't get me wrong, Portal on its own is already a dark game, but this sort of just adds a whole new layer of just disturbing to it. And obviously, if you read the title to this, then you know that I think this theory is, dumb. Basically, I'm gonna break down this video as best as I can, hopefully change the people's perspectives, and we're gonna get started with. Now, the first point that Matt makes in this video is that the name of the achievement that you get when you destroy a companion cube, fratricide, seems a bit off because the definition of fratricide is roughly the killing of one's brother or sister.
It seems like an odd choice of words until you consider that the thousands of test subjects captive at Aperture, the ones who used to live in the large boxes visible at the start of the second game, are just like your brethren and may just have ended up downgraded to a smaller, more disposable box.
Now, I see this in an entirely different light. One of the most important aspects of Portal as a game is that you are very alone. There is not a single human being that you come face to face to in the entire story. So come the time you reach test chamber 17 of 19, you would be so socially deprived that you would gladly form a relationship with this box that visually sticks out from the rest of the game. Some would argue that this relationship would be that of a sibling. That's why the achievement has that name. Again, that's just how I personally interpret this. Anyways, Matt then uses some of GLaDOS' dialogue used in this chamber to imply that she's hinting towards the fact that the cubes are alive. Oh yeah, I should probably mention, Matt's pretty unclear here whether or not the bodies in the companion cubes are dead or alive. He kind of flip-flops in between both. It's just another issue here. The dialogue that he uses are as follows. The Enrichment Center reminds you that the weighted companion cube will never threaten to stab you and in fact cannot speak. In the event that the weighted companion cube does speak, the Enrichment Center urges you to disregard its advice. If it could talk, and the Enrichment Center takes this opportunity to remind you that it cannot, it would tell you to go on without it because it would rather die in a fire than become a burden to you. Now, the graphics used in this part may imply that there's some darker meaning behind her words, but I want to emphasize again, this can be seen in multiple ways.
Well done. Be advised that the next test requires exposure to uninsulated electrical parts that may be dangerous under certain conditions.
This game is full of sarcastic humor, and I am hard-pressed to imagine that this is anything but that. Probably one of my favorite parts about this game would be when you're working your way through a test chamber, you know, minding your own business, when all of a sudden you notice there's a bit of the wall that's opened up a little bit. So you go and you take a peek inside, and oh my god, it's an entire room with all these pictures and writings just lining the walls. These are known as Rattmann dens, created by former scientist turned test subject Doug Rattmann, who is arguably one of the most underappreciated characters in the entire story. He plays such a huge role as to how a child survives after the first Portal game, and in this theory. Matt makes it abundantly clear that Rattmann is seen talking to his companion cube like it were an actual person, even giving him advice that would help him survive. Because you know what that means for a guy that has clear, very noticeable signs of schizophrenia. It means the cube is alive. Anyways, one of the things that the cube does is warn Rattmann not to take these pills labeled as zyprazitone. However, Matt points out that the prescription is actually misspelled.
Except that the real medication would be named zyprazidone without the A. Careless typo made by Valve, or perhaps another aperture test that the cube was aware of.
Except there's a problem with that. Neither of these spellings are correct. This is how you spell zyprazitone. Note the lack of that first A, but also that second Z that should be an S. So why is this prescription so horribly misspelled? I don't know. I really don't. I want to say that this could be a mistake on Valve's part, but I mean, there's no way that you include a very specific name to a very specific medication to a very specific illness and not make sure to spell it correctly. Regardless, let's move on.
While under its effects, the cube no longer talks, and Rattmann almost gets himself killed without its advice. Seems like GLaDOS would have a vested interest in keeping people ignoring this useful source of information.
Let me ask you something. Which of these is more believable? A, the pills that Rattmann takes are specifically oriented to silence the voices coming from strictly inside of the companion cubes. Again, we're going back to the whole cubes are alive thing. Or B, pills are making him sing, like it's stated in the comic. And that's why you can't hear the voices of an inanimate object. I should probably take the time to acknowledge now, if you had any doubts up until this point that Rattmann is in fact mentally ill, he is. Let me make that very clear. Not only does GLaDOS mention that this is documented in his employee file, and then tries to use her advantage to lead him out and kill him, but even Rattmann himself is aware that he is suffering from some kind of cognitive illness. There's even an art therapy book that you can find on page 7 of the Lab Rat comic, which is a real practice that can be used to help with schizophrenia, which explains all of this. Going off of that, Matt also points out that you can find this mural in one of Rattmann's dens that consists of all these pictures of people with the companion cube sort of just pasted over their faces. I'm sure by now you know what that's implying. And again, I see this in a different light. To me, this is the Rattmann seeing the cube as if it were an actual person, having the capability of sharing his interests and being hot, apparently. And not necessarily the people themselves being seen as the cube, or rather, inside of it.
The term objectum sexual.
Oh my god. This is something that I feel I should address now before I get to the last part of the video, and that's the fact that Matt tends to lean heavily onto Portal 2 for his final gotcha point, when, in my humble opinion, it doesn't fit here. I'll talk about Matt's final point now, because there's another thing that he brings up earlier on that I find more captivating. But it's the fact that throughout both games, we never see a companion cube be disintegrated by a material emancipation grill.
The material emancipation grill, or grid depending on who you ask, is a particle barrier set up to disintegrate any unapproved contraband leaving the testing chamber. Basically, any non-organic materials that are meant for that room and that room only.
He then goes on to say that if these cubes were to pass through a particle grid, because they don't dissolve organic material, then only the cube's shell would be dissolved, leaving the body inside behind. That's why GLaDOS chooses to have these cubes incinerated and... Wait, what does she do with the cubes in Portal 2 again? Oh wait, she does disintegrates them. Multiple times. Clear as day. And... nothing's left behind. Look, even if we don't acknowledge that glaring flaw in this theory, I would argue that including Portal 2 entirely just kind of messes this theory up because of its time frame. Because here's the thing, we don't actually know when Portal 2 takes place. At least I couldn't find a solid answer for it. From my research, people have suspected that this game takes place either up to 50 years after Portal or up to 50,000 years after Portal. It's It's kind of a big gap in the middle here. So, this game takes place while the Combine is still occupying Earth. Remember, Half-Life's a part of this universe. Or, Chell is quite possibly the last human alive. And if it's the latter, which I do believe it is, then it is physically impossible for the companion cubes to carry dead weight. In the second game, at least. Look, honestly, I feel like this theory would have been way better off as just an analysis on the first game, especially since most of Matt's points are from the first game, and anything pulled from the second game are just used to hammer in those points. I don't know. Let's move on. So this last point here was the argument that I found to be the most compelling when I first watched this video back in the day. Because, you know, back then I wasn't horribly concerned about fact-checking most of this stuff, making sure that what I was hearing was actually true. I just kind of watched this stuff because this surprised me. Now let me tell you, this last point here blew me away.
Then there's the disintegration sound clip. Listen to it a few times. Can you hear buried in amongst the metallic clang a cry for help? A last...
Now, when my feeble little mind heard this, I was sold. I mean, there was no way it could be faked. I mean, there was audio proof. I knew exactly which chamber this was from. I may not have picked up on the calls for help the first time, but you know what? Maybe I wasn't paying attention. Now, obviously, I wouldn't put this at the end if it was real. So, what if I told you that this sound that you heard wasn't the companion cube? In fact, what if I told you that this sound wasn't from Portal 2 at all? Now, if you're getting a bit confused, let me ask you a question. Why is it that at the beginning of this audio, you hear a radio playing?
Excellent. Please proceed into the chamber lock after completing each test.
So, this might need a bit of context. Back when Portal 2 was nearing the end of its development, Valve wanted to tease the fact that a second game was on the way. And what they did was, definitely eye-catching. Essentially what they did was create a Portal ARG. 2 Portal ARGs, actually. And they are a lot to talk about, and I won't get into them now because I don't want to. I'll touch on the first ARG slightly here. In March of 2010, Portal received its first of 2 updates that actually changed its gameplay. This update in particular added a new achievement called Transmission Received, in which you had to play through all the different test chambers and escape levels and find 26 different radios. Now, the only way to experience this is to beat the game and play it through a second time, so I don't blame like half of you for not knowing that this existed. But when you do, not only will you notice that you'll be hearing that jingle everywhere you go, but also that there's a glowing red light on the front of these radios. And when you move these radios around certain points of the test chamber, the music playing will slowly fade to static, until finally, you reach that sweet spot, and the light turns green and your message comes through. Hey man, listen, I'd really hate to interrupt your nonsensical ranting, but what does this have anything to do with this theory? I'm getting there. Like you saw earlier, that wasn't the only change made to the radios, as when you bring them through an Emancipation grill, it will play one of 3 different audio cues when it's disintegrated, which, fun fact, that version of the radio is the only item in the entire first game to play a sound when destroyed. And of course, one of those sounds was what Matt tried to pass off as the companion cube in his theory. With that, I can now say that this theory, proposed by the game theorist, that the companion cubes house the bodies of failed test subjects, dead or alive, has now been debunked. I want to emphasize, if I haven't already, that I don't have anything against Matt at all. This video is purely out of just fun. I've had this idea of tearing this theory apart for a while now, so just know that I'm not doing this based off of any kind of vendetta or hatred I have against the guy. I just thought this was a fun video idea. I've got no jokes. I'm just gonna go back here again. All right, see you guys. It's great talking to you again. More to come soon.